Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first ever Vessel for Change panel discussion, Women Empowerment in the Workplace. As you all know, it's Women's History Month, and what better way to celebrate than to invite some powerful female leaders to chat with us and share their wisdom and experience. We are so excited to introduce our panelists to you today. We have Ayanna Anderson, the head of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging at Highwire PR. We have Danielle Quinn, Director of Marketing Communications at Ovia Health, Kaye Straight, Partner and Marketing Strategist at Left at First, and Kristin Suplessa, VP of Marketing at EF Education First. Thank you all so much for being here. And just as a note for today, this will be a recorded webinar session, so anyone in the Vessel office watching from home, we cannot see you, but you can see us. And we'll take it away.
So to the panelists, we start all of our Vessel for Change meetings and conversations with our meeting manifesto. So we thought we would start off today the same way. So in all of our conversations, we lead with openness. We assume best intent. These discussions are about spurring positive change and are not meant to be an echo chamber of yes-manning. Stir shit up, but be respectful. Our conversations and actions are intended to empower us all to develop individually and do better collectively. So we just like to keep that in mind as we move forward with all of our discussions. And with that, I think we will officially get started. So hello again to the panelists. Thank you so much for being here. We're so happy to have you. If you could all start off by introducing yourself, just a quick little background, and if you could tell us a woman who's inspired you, we'll go alphabetically. Ayanna, do you want to start us off?
I sure will. Well, first and foremost, I wanted to say thank you so much for this opportunity. Happy Women's History Month. I'm so excited to be here and to be shoulder to shoulder with the panel today. I am as you heard, head of diversity, inclusion, and belonging for Highwire PR, which is a tech and healthcare agency based in San Francisco, but with offices in Chicago, Boston, and New York. And I've been in the role since late 2020. I always tell everyone this is like the perfect culmination of all of my professional pathways. I have a pathway connected to African American studies. I'm an adjunct ethnic studies teacher at a community college here in the Bay Area. But on the other side, I'm also a public relations practitioner, spent some time on the agency side, and have a background in large healthcare systems, education. And so this is like the perfect meld of both of those sides of the business. And we're doing some really exciting work, and it's a really exciting time to be doing this work. In terms of a woman that I admire, this might not be that exciting, but I will just say that my mother is just a source of inspiration, primarily because she is just a perfect example of someone who just constantly reinvents herself. She's never satisfied. She's always like interested in trying the latest and the greatest. Right now, she's like all about Wordle. She wants to know why I'm not participating in Wordle. She's like, don't you want to elevate your vocab? Why aren't you in the Wordle world? I'm like, I don't know. But I love her insatiable curiosity. And I just, now that I'm a mother of 2 teenagers, I have an even better appreciation for her mothering. So I just want to shout out my mom.
Love it. Nice. All right. And I think D comes next in the alphabet. So Danielle, if you
Hi, everyone. I'm Danielle Quinn. I am the Director of Marketing at Ovia Health. We are a women's digital health platform with a focus on kind of the reproductive journey from preconception all the way to parenthood. So we have 3 different apps: fertility, where you can track your cycle, your conception journey to pregnancy, and then finally parenting. You can find us on the App Store. We're free, so quick shout out there. And I had the distinct pleasure of working with 2 members of this wonderful panel today. So Leanna, your very own Leanna Deal, and Kristin. I worked with them at a previous company called Hearts on Fire, which was a diamond jewelry company. But for my inspirational woman, I have to do the same. It's my mom. I grew up in a very kind of traditional sense in that my dad worked 2 jobs, so my mom could stay home with my sister and I. And now that I'm a mother, I understand what kind of sacrifices she made in order to give us kind of the world. And, once we were able, my sister and I were able to get ourselves around to practices and all that good stuff, she started working again and was kind of like the lowly holiday employee at a department store, and climbed the ranks of the corporate ladder within years. And she just proved that regardless of how big that gap is on your resume, like working moms, stay-at-home moms, women have so much value to add. So she's been an ongoing inspiration for me.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. And Kaye, if you could go next.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Kaye Straight. I am a partner and marketing strategist at it's just my partner and I, and we do marketing consulting work primarily for startups and mid-sized companies. I spent most of my career in big corporate marketing jobs, and 3 years ago jumped ship and started doing consulting, and I'm loving it. Let's see, for inspiration. So I was going to do my mom, but let's just say my mom. And I was thinking about, there's so many and it's hard to choose, but I'm gonna, I've admired Oprah my entire life. But one of the most, when I think about just women who they started doing something. So I'll use Reese Witherspoon. She started out a career, and then she became one of the most amazing business women who what did she sell her company for? 900 million, some whatever the number was. So I really respect when, especially women they do something, they're good at it, they get credibility. They get notoriety, and that's great. But then they just keep going. And it's always about continuous learning. And then it turns into business success. And I just find it to be so incredibly inspiring. So.
That's great. Thank you. And last, but absolutely not least, the woman in the box, Kristin.
Great. Hey, everybody. It's good to see you. Not really. I'm Kristin Sepelsa, and I lead the marketing and creative team for a company called EF Education First. We have a lot of different organizations, but the businesses that I support primarily with my team are the ones that take middle school kids and high school kids on sort of the traditional class trip. So kids that want to go, or teachers that want to take their students to Washington, D.C. for the 8th grade trip, or then once in high school, teachers who are taking students all over the world to really expose them to different cultures and opportunities. Our mission as an organization is to open the world through education. So it's really dedicated to the idea that when we understand each other better, the world is a better place, which is why I love something like this, which is just awesome, because it's in the small and the big ways. I think that's really true. Kaye, I feel like you and I have to hang out, because if you knew me, you'd know I love celebrities more than my own family. So I am totally on board with your picking Reese Witherspoon or people like Oprah, which I think is amazing. I am too slow on my feet to pick a new one, because I had stuck with my sister. My sister is older than I am by 4 years. She and I could not be more opposite. She's a judge. She went to all the best schools. She did everything perfect, but she is some of the questions that Ayanna, you and the team had asked us to think about. She exists in a world where having the courage to use your voice and having the courage to stand up for the things that you believe to be true, although she's backed by the law, there's no doubt, but she has to every single day in every single bit of her life make an argument and live with the consequences with it, for better or for worse, which I just have so much respect for. And as a human, she's lovely, so we're good friends, but just that piece of it I find to be just really courageous. So she's my person.
Incredible. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Let's start off with our first question, I guess second question technically. Can you please share some of the challenges that you've faced as a woman in your industry and how you've overcome them? Let's start with Kaye.
Sure. So I mentioned that the majority of my career I spent at big enterprise companies. Probably about 15 years of that was with 2 financial institutions. So financial services, banks, right? So here I was, this is 20 years ago, but I think a lot of it is still there. But especially in financial services, it was predominantly white male. And I was in the marketing department. And so there was actually a lot of women in the marketing department, but sort of broadly within the organization, it was mostly men. And I felt I was a high achiever. I was somebody who delivered, and I felt acknowledged for the sort of execution work that I did. But I was absolutely never felt like I was not taken seriously for any kind of a leadership position. And, here I was, I'm young, I'm blonde, and, there's just stereotypes that go along with that. And so I remember just feeling so frustrated that not only was it's almost worse to get overlooked or to just be like, there's just this automatic, like, well, it wouldn't be you. But there's peers of mine that were male were just automatically considered and inviting to certain meetings or whatever. So I had a wonderful mentor who helped me with an approach. She said, well, what are you going to do about this? What's your approach? And so where I landed was two things. There's a lot I could talk about, but I think to be helpful, it's like, what did I do? And my approach was two things. One was always trying to lead with confidence. I think as women, like it's not always easy to do that, especially if you feel overlooked, marginalized, whatever, right? But I don't know if you ever use the phrase "fake it till you make it," but like what I could go into a meeting and be confident in was my strengths. So that's why it's like you can lead with confidence if it's really about your strengths. Then, you have to also sort of have transparency at times about what you don't know or your weaknesses. But at the end of the day, that actually can also help build credibility. So confidence was number one. And then number two, and this is how I know that I gained credibility and started to get invited to the table, was I just went on a mission to learn the business. So again, in marketing, you tend to sort of, I know my piece of the pie, and I'm just going to focus on that expertise and get that work done. But, the more I just got hungry to learn the business, then you start being able to jump in, and you use that confidence, obviously, but just jump into the conversation. And amazingly, they start to take you a lot more seriously. And I got leadership roles and involved, but I just, to think about how did that feel at times, it's easy to let your emotions get to you and to get mad. And I just decided I was not going to do that. I got motivated.
Mm-hmm.
So I would like, when I would have emotional, like, that's not fair, and I'm not being treated, and this isn't, or people would make comments that I didn't like, or there were at times, sexual advances and things that are, absolutely not appreciated. Right. But I got motivated. So.
Thank you, Kaye.
Yeah.
Ayanna, would you share your perspective from the diversity, equity, and inclusion side of the challenges of women in the workplace?
Yeah, I can completely relate to that kind of frustration around knowing that you're ready for leadership, feeling like you've done all the work, the requisite things to be given the nod, and then you get overlooked, and just having that hurt of like, I've done all the right things, I have all the right degrees, I've done it all, and yet there's some barrier. So that definitely is something I can relate to. What I will say in terms of overcoming that, in terms of a solution that worked well for me, was kind of going outside of my field and taking advantage of industry affiliations, in this case, like employee resource group-ish organizations where I could volunteer, or working with communications professional, associations in the Bay Area, just leaning into some external places where you have that opportunity to create a niche for yourself, to have additional work, and to sort of build out your portfolio with other assets to kind of make the case for yourself. That is what I just leaned in on. I was like, okay, so my primary job, I'm not getting the nod. I'm going to be the chair for this. I'm going to volunteer to be the lead for this African American Month discussion. I'm going to lead this webinar. So looking at your pivot potential is what I would suggest. Looking for those ways to kind of pivot outside the main and finding those side, venues and vehicles to really get your shine on.
Yeah, can I add on to what you're saying there? Because I think that's, and I couldn't agree with you more. And I think one of the things I'll add to that is doing that even internally. Like, find your tribe a little bit inside of the organization. So even if it isn't your direct manager or the person that works for you or next to you, but I would wager there are other people around the organization that are feeling the same way you do, or that have similar interests, or that can just become speaking and thought partners that then starts to build your coalition. It isn't always directly about what you're saying in the room. Oftentimes, sometimes for better or worse, it's what's being said about you outside the room. And if you can start to build up on sort of that narrative and find your people, find your tribe, I've found that to be super useful. And I'm totally with you as far as working in big organizations, Kay. I think sometimes that's been what saved me. I'm not always in the room, but I have my own people that know and can sort of be a voice on my behalf.
That's great. And on the same topic, for those of you who have children, which is most or all, I believe, how has being a working parent had an impact on your career, especially this past year with COVID? Danielle, do you want to start us off there? Mostly because I know you have 2 younger ones at home.
Yeah, definitely. Listen, I'm not going to sit here and say that COVID had a positive impact on my career at all. I think, the proof's out there that women were leaving or have been and are continuing to leave the workforce in like gigantic numbers that we haven't seen in a long time. And that's because not only are working parents asked to be full-time employees and full-time parents, but also homeschool teachers, art teachers, the entertainers, daycare providers, and it just got to be too much. I can go on and on about this because it's very much in the wheelhouse of what I do at Ovia Health, but I will say there were some positives that came out of this experience for me that I'll take on, for the rest of my career, I hope. One being that I will unapologetically bring my whole self to work. I think we all kind of had to do that. Although, when quarantine hit, we were separated, but like all of a sudden we were inviting people into our personal space, whether you live with parents or pets or roommates, like all of a sudden, like, you guys are in my bedroom right now, so for me, that meant having my kids always around, especially during those early quarantine days. And I came from a previous organization, wink, wink, that I was made to feel the fact that I had kids, I was taking advantage of the fact that I needed flexibility. Mm-hmm. And I was made to feel as though I was almost in the wrong for needing that extra flexibility because I had young kids. So when I went into this new role, which was, I started in October 2019 at Ovia, I wanted to make sure like I wasn't known as the girl with the young kids. Like I wanted to be at every meeting. I didn't want to have to leave early. I wanted to set myself up as someone you could trust and rely on, and, et cetera, et cetera. Even though it was a super family friendly place. And that was one part of the reason I went there. But then COVID hit and we had no choice but to bring everyone at work at home with us. And it just like shined a light of like, this is where I am in my moment. This is where I am in my life at this moment. I'm using it as an advantage. I work in a field that is very much dedicated to, not only women's reproductive health, but her rights and her rights as a mom and her rights as a young mom. So that I will never shy away from the fact that, my family comes first, my kids come first, and I can use that as an advantage. The second I'll say like, the second thing I learned about myself that I can take forward is, taking it back to March 2020, I was 5 months into a new job, new company, new field. I had a 1.5-year-old toddler at home and I was 4 months pregnant. And then the world shut down. And so like fast forward to this time, I have 2 beautiful kids. Me and my husband kept our jobs. We kept our marriage. We're still married. And so I can say that like, I undeniably can do hard things. Like one foot in front of the other, I can endure. And I don't know if I would have had that confidence to say that before this whole experience, but it was certainly a journey and a learning experience for me.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. Thank you so much. Does anybody else have anything to add about parenting while also trying to do your job?
I'll add one thing. I'm in a situation now where I have I'm kind of an interim CMO at a company right now. And I have a gal who's out on maternity leave, and we're trying to think about what the future looks like. And a man said, well, she might not want to come back, and that's of course true. I mean, it's like when you go on maternity leave, and it made me think about myself, and it's just something that I think that's worth sharing. I pretty much always knew I have one daughter, she's 9 now, but when I went on maternity leave, like I knew I was going to come back, but I didn't know what it was going to be like. And I would say that I love the phrase work smarter, not harder. Like I used to work all the time, and I used to have this, it's a service oriented, I have to do that. And I'd log in all the time and I just do that. And once you become a parent, you just have this whole other dimension. And so you talk about juggling. It's just so you still need to deliver at work, but you also need to do all of this at home. And I just got so much, because you have to, I got so much better at prioritization. I got better at boundaries. Cause I had to, the little human had to, right. And I never went back to the way that I was before. And so if you ask me, how did that affect you professionally? Better. I'm a better leader. I'm more productive. I'm more efficient. Again, because I just learned I had to be.
Mhm.
So anyway, something to add.
Yeah, if I could just say one more thing on that, same feeling. And I would also say because I feel like so many of my colleagues were in the same boat, that I just leaned in to grace. So if I didn't have enough bandwidth and I'm on a Zoom, and then all of a sudden the internet kicks me off because I have 2 kids that are also Zoom schooling, I have to get back on. I didn't feel like I had to be embarrassed. I didn't feel like there would be this side eye, what are you literally doing? I'm we're all trying to work here. And I think that everyone was in that boat and they got it. And actually one thing that I ended up loving was just the opportunity for me to have lunch with my children. I kind of got spoiled. I mean, and that's not to say that I don't want them in school, because I'm very glad that they are back in school. And I think that they're thriving much more so, but just as a mother, because we are ripping and running so much, there was something really special about the fact that we were in the house together more, which has not been my experience up until the pandemic. So that was a blessing that came out of it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel similarly. And I think my experience, my boys are 17 and 14. And so my experience with them was, I know, right, was a little bit since we're all home together, first of all, I love sitting and having breakfast with them in the morning. It's amazing. But then they were so much more in tune with what I was doing with work, that it wasn't come in the door. I almost didn't usually talk about work with them because I wanted to talk about them and what was going on with them. Now I feel I've gotten into this interesting role model position with them, where it's actually a little bit to the topic of this, here's what a woman in a management position looks like, boys, and be ready for it and be aware of it and understand what that looks like and what it feels like. And when I say ways you shouldn't be speaking to me, or you shouldn't be, now you can put it in the context of, oh, wait a minute, you're not just my mom. I've actually seen you on a Zoom call with a jillion people listening to what you have to say. And so maybe I should, I'm not making the best connection, but you know what I mean? It's sort of sharing what I do in a much different way with them and hoping that they pick it up and use it in their own lives in some weird way. Has been really nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great perspective.
Yeah. I love that exposure to the role model side too, the seeing women in their empowered state at home as well. So on kind of starting off the topic of challenges, many women experience an additional challenge of microaggressions in the workplace, such as being called bossy or aggressive instead of perhaps direct or assertive. Do you have any examples that you've seen of this in the workplace? And perhaps if it's happened to you, how have you navigated those scenarios?
Would you like me to start? I'm happy to start.
Perfect. Yeah.
That off. So I love this topic. And what I will say is that since I've been in this role, my own understanding of microaggressions has really evolved. And I now know that there's a spectrum of microaggressions that can be something sort of minute, like a micro indignity, and then something that goes all the way to macroaggression or just straight up harm. So I think having the awareness that there's a spectrum for these moments is important. At Highwire in particular, we have really done a lot of deep work around inclusive language. We've done a lot of deep work around why pronouns are important. And we actually had an all agency conversation on the terms that sort of elevate you and affirm you, and then the terms that diminish you.
Mhm.
And it was very interesting to give voice to, I think, some terms that, without the context of a lived experience or historical reference, people were unaware that some of these terms could be harmful. So the example I gave is sassy. And I have had the scenario of being in workplaces, and I can be, outspoken and I guess expressive. And then a colleague will say, I just like that you're so sassy at work. And I'm like, sassy doesn't really affirm me as a Black woman, because there's like a pejorative trope associated with like sassy Black women and like, being sort of misrepresented in media. And so much so that like even in the Highwire conversation, a colleague who's on the editorial side said, oh my God, there was a whole magazine called Sassy in the 90s. Like, what happened? And I'm like, true, but understand that like in my case, like that's not something that I really respond to. And I think there are better alternatives. So to the extent that we kind of open up that dialogue, we actually have now an inclusive language guide at the agency as a resource for these exact moments where people may say, like even girl boss. I'm like, some people at the agency are like, is that a fly term? Is that like a cool term, or is that a problematic term? So we're constantly doing the work to unpack. I think that's key.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Well thought. Any of our other panelists have experience with microaggressions or offhanded comments? How you've navigated those?
I don't know that this fits in exactly. It's almost the inverse or the reverse or the opposite of what you're saying, where I tend to be much less, I'm not super outspoken, and I'm sort of a listener, and I want to take it in first and hear and understand and then come back with. And my mantra is always like with Danielle and Leanna May Roner, like put it on a piece of paper. When it lives on a piece of paper, it's real, partly because I need that time to process what I'm thinking and bring it to the table. And so on the inverse, I've often been like, well, she doesn't speak up that much, so she probably doesn't have a point of view. And I'm like, no, I actually do. I just, that this table of 12 people isn't going to be the place that I'm going to bring it forward. So put it on a piece of paper has become my escape route out of that, as a way to bring forward ideas with a little consideration behind them first.
And is part of that process, if you were to get feedback that you're too quiet or don't speak up enough, to educate whoever you're talking to and let them know, like, this is how I operate.
Totally. We have a cool thing, which you all may know about, but I had never encountered it before EF, called Strengths Finder. And it gives you, everybody knows about it, right?
Yeah.
So interestingly, some of my top 5 include communication and winning others over. So there is a skill there, but it isn't one that is like with a megaphone, right? It's just a different approach. So that's made a nice tool for me to be able to say, great, I hear you. One of my top skills is communication, but in this, it looks like this for me. And so let's figure out how that goes, which has been really helpful.
Yeah.
That's so great. I'm the opposite of you. One of the things I was just going to add is I've had that kind of, microaggressions, whatever, my whole career. And one of the things that I've learned is very much like I'm a study of human behavior. I think it's fascinating when people have, and now that I'm a mother, I always call it big emotions. I'm like, oh, you're having big emotions right now, just like my 9-year-old, like, and I think it's fascinating. And it's sort of like, I wonder where that's coming from. So instead of like, I work really hard to not overreact, certainly, but sometimes I just don't even react in the moment. I'm like, that seems more about you than it does me. So, like, and that's, I think you can unpack it later, right? But it's when you start to just have like a really emotional reaction in the moment that you just find you go nowhere. It goes nowhere, right? So I just often use I just acknowledge, I hear you. Or maybe I ask a clarifying question, but I just I don't give a lot of weight to whatever negativity or they're saying. That's how I often handle it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great.
So we've talked about some challenges. We want to pivot now to, what are the benefits of being a woman in the workplace, and especially being or having a female leader? What do you think that does to a team, a company, and just like your experience in general? Kristin, do you want to start us off on that one?
Yeah, I would love to. And I think I'm probably giving this answer to an audience, or, preaching to the choir a little bit, but I believe that I actually love being a woman in a leadership position, and I love people and teams are from where I get my energy personally. I love that. And I think part of it is because I believe that the more I can understand and know who you are, the better our relationship is going to be, the more well-functioning this team is going to be. And at the risk of maligning our gender partners, I feel like women have an innate ability to lead with a little bit more empathy, have a little bit of a more permission, maybe in some ways, to get personal in a way that men probably don't. And I think there is just a real benefit that I've found in my own career to create super authentic relationships as a result of that it is okay to say, you and I are having this conversation because you and I are having this conversation, not manager and employee or peer to peer. It's actually human to human. We're having this discussion, and let's think about it that way. And I really think that is something that women just do well and naturally in a different way than men do. The other thing I think is really interesting about the pandemic, and Danielle, for you in particular, I little kids, when I watch my team try to navigate the world of important meetings or whatever, and frankly, little kids, pets barking in the background, neighbors coming, delivery men, whatever, I think there was probably a previous notion that to be strong and to be super professional, that you hit all that. And I think early in the pandemic, it was like, quick, go on mute, or like turn off my background or whatever. But instead, what I always say to the team is like, everybody off mute, like get your phone. I want to hear breathing. I want to hear dogs. I want to hear kids, because that's real. Like, let's all understand that we're dealing with this as professionals, but we're dealing with this as people, and let's help each other by understanding what each other is going through. And I wonder if that's happening in some of the teams where my colleagues are men. And I wonder if that's the same sort of conversation that they're happening. And I think, being able to understand that strength doesn't always mean ignoring that part of your personality. And in fact, sometimes that is actually where the true strength and the true people lining up behind you as a leader comes from.
Yeah, Kristin, I totally agree. And I have a unique experience where, Kristin and Leanne, I know my husband too, but he is also a director level. He has a team. I have a team where I am, and to be able to see our different managing styles is really interesting. Actually, just last night, he may be getting like this whole new group of people who is mainly women. It's pretty much customer service. And the first thing I said to him was, you should hop on the phone and take over one of their positions for a week and just see how that goes. And he was like, wow, I never thought of it that way. I'm like, rather than saying like, I don't know what they do. I don't know what they do all day. I'm like, find out what they do all day, So to have a different perspective, I think, is something that as women, we can come to the table with, because I don't know, I feel like, and again, not to bash the opposite sex, it's just like, we've had to be creative in a lot of different ways. We've had to kind of pivot and just look at things in a different perspective in order to get ahead and kind of like wiggle our way into these leadership roles sometimes. And for men, sometimes it's much more black and white. But it's been really interesting to see how kind of our leadership is different.
I think that is super interesting, Danielle. And today I was talking to some members of my team who are we all open environments. So I'm like, hey, I'm doing this thing later. And like, here's one of the things, what do you all think? Like, you are also leaders of your own teams in this department. And one of the answers that I thought was so interesting is like, female leaders are very often, they have their job, different than men. Very few female leaders have their job just because that's the next step. And so here you go. And just as you're saying, Danielle, like, it's more likely that a female leader has worked her way to that position with skills and ability that are maybe different than some of her colleagues. Yeah, that's really interesting.
I would say too, just innovation that's been alluded to here. And if you really kind of think about, at least when I consider like my approach to mothering, and I'm in a household where people don't like leftovers, and they say that there's nothing in the fridge for lunch. And I'm like, are you sure about that? Let's take a little bit of this, a little bit of this. Have you considered this? Have you paired that? And then you're just sort of working it out. And you're like, I've curated this amazing lunch and amazing leftovers for tonight. So I think we do have options here. And that probably sounds very like trite, but it's true. Like, I think because in my case, I have this internal audience of, critics sometimes. And it's like, what can I do to make this group happy? But also like, let's work with what we've got and figure out some solutions. Mm-hmm. So I think just kind of bringing that household expertise forward, and it just all becomes like a virtuous circle, right? Like, it's like that informs the work, and maybe you bring in some of that work vibe back to the household, like, the innovation piece.
Mm-hmm. I love that metaphor too. That's so great. Yeah. Right. How was it like earlier in your career versus now in terms of maybe some of the benefits or some of the challenges? Have things changed and to what degree? Maybe let's start with Kaye.
Sure. I'm so much more self-aware now. I
Mhm.
mean, in my 20s, I mean, I knew everything. I did. I don't, if you told me that I thought I knew everything, I would have said that. I thought, it just, but what I realized is I didn't know what I didn't know. And so once I got knocked off my horse a little bit. Learning self-awareness and really being able to check in with yourself has helped me understand. I mean, you start with yourself and then it helps you understand other people much better. And you mentioned Strength Finders. I've done that. I feel like I've done almost every kind of communication style, colors, that if you ever have opportunities to do any kind of that training or, like leadership development, you should do it because perspective is everything. I mean, we come to the table and you don't understand, why can't I get along with this person or this group? Like, my whole career I've been in marketing. I do mostly strategy, but I'm a talker. I'm an idea person. I'm a strategy, big picture person. I'm a dreamer. Right. Mm-hmm. So finance people have always, I drive them crazy, right? Just nuts. And they like, it's many times there's just been conversations where you get nowhere and it's just really awkward or, and I think about how that went when I was younger in my career, where I was pretty sure I was right. And I was just guns a-blazing in there and trying to get things done and prove what I could do versus really learning and self-awareness back to like one of my strength finders is woo. Like I come in, I work the room, I'm talking to everybody, and it never worked. There was a VP of finance that I desperately had to partner with to get this, sort of high profile project done. And he couldn't stand working with me. I mean, he literally would say like, I'm not going to be in a meeting with her. So I had to put on a full court press of like, I had to have an action plan. I had to figure it out. And so what I would start to do with him was I would set up a meeting. I would go in, I would have all of my numbers, everything like written out. And I would just walk in, no eye contact, just led right with, I flexed my style for his, right? So I just got right to the business. I only talked about numbers, whatever. And if there was any chit chatting, we'd do it at the end. And over a series of like 3 meetings, I started to win him over. And by the end of it, he went to my boss and said like, I was really wrong about Kaye. She really know. So once I realized that my way isn't always the best way in every situation. Mm-hmm. So now it's that learning to read the room better, be a better listener is always, so I do that much better now because I'm self-aware and I don't just go in and be my full self all the time. I know when I need to dial the Kaye down a little bit, so, gel better with others. So
I would just say when we kind of talked about like normalizing that we're human and normalizing a human experience, when I entered the PR agency side of the business, it was approximately 17 years ago. And my son, who's now 16, I remember that during my pregnancy, I was like, when I have my son, I didn't know it was a boy, but when I have my child, I know that with this environment being so frenetic, that I'm going to want to have a day to work from home. Like, so it was a whole plan of mine to like, just talk about how I'm a high performer. I bring a lot of value to the organization, but at the end of the day, I'm commuting. I have this newborn. Like, once, I was back, I want to work that into the schedule. And I mean, when I made the ask, there were some of my male, vice presidents who really resented that. Like they really resented that I felt like I could get that one day from home. And that was so unfair and it sends the wrong message. And I mean, it was like, I had to battle to get that one day. And I did see that, in terms of my performance review, it was, there was some, subtle sort of subtext, like, well, since you're not in the office, you missed out on the opportunity to bond with the team, so there was like a little bit of a punitive aspect. So to now be in the scenario of this like hybrid work model or flex work model, or do what makes you work and thrive in the best way that you can, is like a complete miracle for me. Like, I'm like, we've come a long way. Not to say that we have solved all those issues, but literally just in my own lived experience of having to fight for the one day a week to have that flexibility. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a similar experience too. And that wasn't 16 years ago. It was just a few, 2, 3, 4 years ago, where it was a battle, and I did not win that battle. And that, like, I took it personally. I had been with the company for 8, 9 years, and for them not to allow me one day to work from home after all the things that I had done for them, I just felt like so bad. Like, I just felt like I was like, beaten down by that. And then, now everything's completely changed and everyone works from home there. There's only a very small group of people that go in now. But it's for the better, and I think especially for working parents, like, there was a silver lining to this COVID, in that it allowed for companies to understand that we'll get our shit done, like, don't worry about us. Like, we're going to get our stuff done. You hire the right type of people, they're going to work for you. They're going to get their stuff done, regardless of where it is or what hours it is or anything like that. And it took me a long time to figure that out. Cause I in the beginning of my career, I was a yes man. I was if we were open 9 to 5, I was there from 8:30 to 5:30, and now with kids, with COVID, with everyone working from home, you don't really have that opportunity anymore. And you can sign on at different times and figure out what your schedule works like. So I'll say that's a huge improvement for me, especially right now where I am in my life.
So thank you all for that. How do you think coworkers and leadership can support women's empowerment and promote more women into leadership positions? I know we've talked a ton about what you've all done personally to like push and scratch and crawl your way, but what do you think others that are already in leadership positions can do to support the women in their office? Ayanna, do you want to start with this one?
Sure. I think one easy thing is to kind of pour into another woman with the vision that you have for her and her career. And that has been like hugely significant in my own trajectory when I've had other women who are like, I really think you should go for XYZ. I think you have everything that it takes. I think you'd be a natural fit. I think you would like elevate this role, like just that encouragement and that like folks being visionary on my behalf. And then just being those cheerleaders to say, like, if you're not thinking about this, you should seriously consider that. And then the second thing that's so key, I think, is helping women to bolster their social capital, right? So making those inroads on behalf of other women, telling your colleagues, again, like, here's an environment that I think you might want to consider in terms of networking. Here's a group I think you should get more synced with, and I think you might find it very useful and fruitful. That has been incredible. And as I always and often tell folks, like there are certain entities and facets of like the professional ecosystem I just don't even know about, So when people are talking about sponsorship and when people are talking about board appointments and, just like providing those on-ramps for folks and finding those ways that you can bring that education and you can connect people with the resources and with that blueprint if they don't otherwise know it, I would say is really key.
That's great.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think I feel almost an obligation to do what is so easy and people talk about all the time is just bring people along with you. Just like invite someone to sit in on a meeting, have coffee. Like the more I can do, which feel like tiny things, or encourage other leaders and managers around me to do as tiny things, it just continues to create conversation. And I could not agree with you more, Ayanna, about like also building up the people around you, because it is too easy, or at least I have found it is too easy to feel like not quite good enough. I don't quite meet all the requirements for that. I don't check every box in that thing. And guess what? It does not matter. Like instead, focus on the areas where you do, double check that box, and let's work on that and making sure that we can find the ways to help each other in this sort of community of women, but just helping each other understand and see where there's value and be able to bring people along with you. I have found both personal fulfillment from it, but also it is, I think, a really important way to start the conversation, have other people see that you're doing it and having that conversation on a day-to-day basis.
I couldn't agree more with everything that you just said. And I dedicate a lot of time to coaching, mentoring, empowering, like just, and honestly, it doesn't take a lot of time. It's just like, I try to give feedback too, like regularly and more in the moment, like when it's happening. And so if I'm noticing a woman that I just know is really talented, but she's not leaning into her best, I might just sort of say something and of encouragement. And one of the things I always do is almost like ask people to pay it forward. Like, it's just, I'm having this conversation with you, but please do that with others. Like, just as it comes up, especially if they thank me, like, oh, that's really helpful. Thank you. You can thank me by doing it for somebody else, you know? And this truly just happened like a month ago. And I was so touched. Like, there's two women that it was 6 years ago that I left this job, and these two women who've stayed in touch, and they set up time with me via Zoom, and their intention was to just tell me the difference that I made. And they spent like 20 minutes telling me all the people, like, you gave me this advice, and then I gave it to her and her and her. And it just was like, I mean, it made my year. It was the coolest thing. And it's like the advice I gave her, my mentor had given me. It's like, it wasn't even mine. I just passed it along, you know? So I think that's one of the best things we can do, is just to take it viral, you know, just like encourage others. That's how we're going to make a difference, I think, is like everybody working together. And
definitely. This is actually like a full circle moment for me, because the woman who brought me along is Kristin Sepulsa, and kind of took me under her wing for a few years, and, you know, invited me to the meetings, invited me on the trips, and, you know, gave me the confidence to say, like, I don't have to stay here. I don't have to stay in this role. I can do better. So it's really a special moment.
Oh, I love it so much. Thank you for saying that. And listen, but the important part of that job too was, by the way, I wasn't doing you any favors, right? Look at you now. That was just like giving you the, like, being that little voice in your, that you did it.
Yeah.
It's just somebody needed to give you that.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Danielle, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I think as women, sometimes it's like, you need someone else to recognize the abilities that you have, you know, because I think for so long, like, you just end up questioning yourself of like, am I good enough? Should I be in this room? I don't know anything. But like, having someone to be like, no, you know you know what you're doing. Go ahead. You know, you just need someone to like kind of push you over the edge there.
Totally. And something you said earlier, Danielle, totally sticks with me, is that like bringing your whole self to work. I have to say, one of the things I think as a woman, and I started back when like I had to wear a suit and I had to like try to blend like the things that were not natural to me. And by the way, I'm not like the smoothest person. So I like dumb jokes and I'm sort of like awkward sometimes. And this team, someone sort of had an experience like we had a little bit, Kaye, where someone here, when Kaye called me after an all hands meeting, was like, by the way, I just want you to know, it's encouraging to me to know that like you can be kind of like, you know, a clown and still be successful. And I was like, all right, I don't feel like I'm a clown entirely, but it was good to be able to say like, see, it's okay. Like, this is who I am. And so I'm not going to have another job that is the suit or whatever. That's not going to be for me, but I have found the place that is, and it's okay to be exactly who you are. And I think that is so important. That's where my confidence comes from, knowing that what I'm doing is what I'm doing. And if you like it, great. And if you don't, and I'll be in the room. And if not, then that's not the room I'm supposed to be in, you know?
We kind of touch on this a little bit at a high level, but have you ever felt imposter syndrome? And maybe even through mentoring, how have you helped other women overcome imposter syndrome? I think it's something that every woman and possibly men feel this as well. It can be a very hard thing to overcome. So what have you seen be successful, or how do you navigate those feelings?
I mean, Lee and I used to have this conversation a lot about, we didn't even know it was called imposter syndrome. It was just basically, we've been in this role, we've been at this company for so long, this is all I know, I don't know anything else. And it honestly, for me, it took like an outside person to come in and be like, hey, you're good at this, you know, because otherwise when we started way back in 2011, 10, I don't know what it was a very male dominated leadership team. And as long as you kind of looked a certain way, or if you acted a certain way and you kind of served them with what they needed, you were fine, but there was no opportunity to kind of move up, and they didn't help shape, or like didn't help coach you places. And then it took some movement and it took some new leaders like Kristin and a few others to come in and say, we have a really talented team here. And it took, and I think that it kind of stinks that it had to take someone outside for us to believe that, but that's what it took. And, I still have glimpses of it too, the imposter syndrome. I remember starting at my new company. I was terrified to start. I knew the other company for like the back of my hand. And then coming to this new place, I was like, oh my God, I don't know anything. But then you just, as you get a little bit older, like the shame goes away and you're like, hey, I don't know what you're saying. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what that acronym means. Can you just explain it to me? And that's how I kind of have kept going, one foot in the front of the other.
I'll just build on that and I sort of mentioned this earlier when I was talking, but similarly, I spent 10 years in financial services, so I really knew banking. I knew a lot of things about that, but then I switched industries and went into telecom, and I worked at T-Mobile, and boy, was I just really was hard on myself. I was so worried about it. And so like that I just was going to come in and not know enough about the business. And so again, what did I do with it? That's that whole, sometimes you really do have to look at yourself in the mirror, talk to yourself and say, you're smart, you can do this. This is what you're good at. So I definitely had a few talks with myself before I went into certain meetings, but, because we're our own worst enemy.
Yeah.
You telling yourself, I don't know this, I'm going to bomb in this meeting. I'm not, that comes to pass. Like you tell yourself that's pretty much what's going to happen. You tell yourself, well, I may not know everything that's going to happen in this meeting, and I may not have all the context, but I do know I'm good with people. I'm going to ask smart questions. I'm going to use everything I have in my tool belt, and I'll bet I'm going to add some value in this meeting. I'm going to go in there and kill it. And you know what? You're going to do a hell of a lot better than if you said the other things to yourself. So that's, I'm a little weird that way, but I do talk to myself. I write myself notes. I literally I script things out sometimes because you can tell, talk a lot. I'll wander if I don't. So if I'm worried about a certain meeting and I think I'm imposter syndrome and I'm not sure how I'm going to show up, I write out what I for sure would want to say or what I think is going to be relevant in that meeting, so that I can be really contributing. So that's a tip, maybe.
I would say too, from a Dibs lens, one of the things we had an all agency conversation about imposter syndrome, and it was interesting because we had perspectives from upper echelon EVPs, white men who kind of talked about their battles with it. We talked about sort of the transgenerational and intergenerational kind of inherited sense of it. If you witness, a parent struggling with it, sometimes you're more prone to it. But one of the things that we highlighted, I think is important, is that for folks who are underrepresented and they're navigating workplaces that were not created for them, sometimes there's an assumption that the feeling is imposter syndrome, when in fact, it's just a discomfort about like being the one of the, few, if not, the person, or, not having that representation. And also the expectations, like when you are, the one or one of a few, there's an added expectation and a pressure you put on yourself because you're like, I'm here representing a whole group that isn't in this workplace. And so I need to be erudite. I need to be strategic, smart. Like I can't make mistakes. I can't flub, because if I do, there is so much that like rests on me being successful so that other people can come through the door. So there's that added pressure of like needing to be exceptional and struggling like with that and the perception that you are exceptional to be worthy. So I just want to offer that up too.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I'm going to say the cheesiest thing, Ayanna, because I love what you just said, is if anybody on the call is a Peloton rider, I'm obsessed with it. And one of the instructors, she says, one of her lines is, it's okay for you to be a work in progress and a masterpiece at the same time. And I think that's such a good thing to think about. Like there is no end to, you're never going to be perfection and perfect. And if you're in the room, it's because you were invited in somehow. You didn't just bust through the door on your own, you're in the room. So oftentimes I'm in the room and I'm sweating so much and I feel like I'm not going to be able to talk. But guess what? There's a reason that you're there. And so remember that it's, it's never finished. You're going to be 150 years old and still working on making yourself. And that's okay. Yeah.
I love it. And what a great place to kind of to end too. I mean, I feel like I could talk to all of you for the next hour.
Yes.
But we're on our last 2 minutes. And I just want to say thank you so, so much. This was invaluable, for lending us an hour of your time. I know I can speak for Kristin and I and everyone in the room, in the other room. We just thank you all so much for being here. And we can't wait to talk about this at our happy hour after work later and just keep this conversation going. So as a reminder to the panelists and for anyone in the room who doesn't know, as a thank you, we'd really like to donate $100 on your behalf to a charity of your choosing. So as a reminder, send us your nonprofit, and we'll make sure that donation goes out. And to the team here, thank you so much for being here and for supporting our panelists and supporting Vessel for Change. We couldn't do any of this without your support and your enthusiasm for Vessel for Change. And as a reminder, you get 2 hours a month for Vessel for Change activities, discussions, etc. So, let us know if you want to join our planning meetings. You can come to activities, discussions. We have a beach cleanup April 20th. So please come to that. And we'll post a link in Slack following the meeting with a reminder of the Google form we have if you have any ideas, if you want to submit them anonymously. And I think that does it for our panel discussion. Thank you all so
Thank you
much.
so much.
This
Thank
is
you.
great. I'd
Phenomenal.
love to come to the
Pleasure.
beach cleanup.
Yeah,
And your happy hour. Both of those sound great.
Maybe I'll have a blow up mattress with their name on it.
Perfect.
Wonderful.
Thanks all.
All right. Bye. Thanks,
Take
everyone.
good care, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.